Hi everybody, today we are going to paint, guess what? A few more portraits. This is simply a continuation from last week when we created portraits using oil pastels. So the aim today is once again to show you just how easy it can be to create a portrait. You can begin sketching directly onto the surface, and as you can see, it's a very simple drawing. You can use a model if you like, but there is absolutely nothing too complex here. I thought it would be a good practice to try a few techniques on white paper. Well, this paper here is actually more of a light cream, but it will still give you an idea of what the oil pastels look like on a white surface. All you need is to mark your basic guidelines, and if you wish, you can add a few bolder lines to indicate where the shadows will fall. And don't fill in any shapes completely. Keep it looking like a drawing that's been faded or washed out by the rain. It creates this ghostly, aged, weathered effect that I personally find absolutely beautiful. And again, as you can see here, it's still the same very basic composition. What adds visual interest is simply the way the colors blend into the surface. By the way, I'm using acrylic paper here. It's the type of paper made for acrylic paints, but it works well with other mediums too. It has a satin texture that emulates the feel of the canvas. I often use this with watercolors, and it works beautifully with oil pastels, allowing for a smooth blending. Now I am adding a second color to introduce some lights. It's only a touch, just enough to bring a hint of highlight in certain areas of the composition. You can use any colors you like, of course. I tend to go for contrasting colors because with just a few, you can still create a very engaging piece. In the end, it looks a bit like a portrait that's been overexposed or has lost some of its color. And if you look back at the original sketch, you'll see it is the same simple drawing. Okay? What gives it character is how the pastels are blended into the composition. And just like that, with something as simple as two sticks, you can create a very interesting effect. Let's move on and make another one. From this point, we're going to repeat the process with some small changes to how we choose or blend the colors. We begin again with a very simple sketch and a very simple composition, drawing directly onto the paper, and I'm trying to limit my color palette here to just two colors, and that's what gives it the ghostly appearance. Here again, I'm working with portraits, but just imagine what else you could do. Florals, landscapes, still lifes, animals. Imagine creating a portrait of your dog using this technique. It is such a simple process, and yet I think it allows for much expression. You should definitely give it a try, okay? Once I've done with the sketch, I can already add the highlights. It's slightly different to the first piece where we added the highlight color only after the first color had been blended in. Here I am applying both colors together to see what kind of effect I can get. Because I'm using complementary colors, they tend to create a slightly brownish tone where they mix, which I think it's rather rich and lovely. Once that's done, I might add a few more of the colors just to reinforce the highlights and add a bit more definition. But it really couldn't be any simpler than this. This one might actually be my favorite from this batch. Next up, another variation. Remember, always try to create a series. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. Again, I'm using two very basic colors to create that ghostly effect, and I think it works really nicely. This time I'm using one color just for the main facial features and the second color for the secondary details like the hair, the chin, and so on. Next up, we have a sculptural face. Do you remember a few weeks ago when we did portraits inspired by sculptures? Well, we're doing the same thing here again, only that this time we are using oil pastels. It's a very basic composition and it really cannot get any simpler than this, okay? Once the baselines are in, all I need to do is to add the shadows and then blend them in. This time I'm using three colors. Umber for the main lines, and then I'm playing with the light direction, okay? So everything lit from one direction is highlighted in blue, and everything lit from the other side is pink. So it is just another effect you can explore with this technique, and I think it worked out very, very nicely. Next up, I'm changing the paper. Now I'm using cotton paper here, just to show you how the pastels will behave on a different surface. This is actually watercolor paper. It has a much more matte texture, and blending isn't quite as smooth. And the final result looks more like a draft or a sketch, which might appeal to you if you prefer that kind of raw, expressive look. It's not as smooth as the acrylic paper, so the result has a rougher, sketchier finish. Someone pointed out the way I hold the sticks, and the reason my fingers are positioned like that is to avoid smudging or contaminating the drawing by accident. So when I'm smudging intentionally, I'm not too concerned, but while I am drawing, I want the marks to be very deliberate, so only where I want them to be, okay? So many people ask me about the materials I use, what brands I'd recommend, and so on. And while I do often answer in the comments or elsewhere, I don't tend to focus too much on specific materials in the videos. And that's because I don't want you to simply replicate what I'm doing. I don't expect you to look at these exercises and think, I'm going to do exactly that. What I do expect is for you to say, I can create my own version of that. And to do that, you don't need the same materials I'm using. You can use whatever tools you're comfortable with. I am mainly using watercolors and acrylics, but if you're more comfortable with oils, why not try these using oils? Or if you prefer gouache, how do you adapt this technique to that medium? Do you see what I mean? I want you to be you, to take any insight we share here or that you see anywhere else to make it your own. I expect you to do your own thing. Try your own colors, your own materials, your own interpretation. Let whatever I do here or whatever you see anywhere else be a starting point, a spark to inspire you to go out and create your own art that's going to be yours. Okay. And finally, this last one, well, I almost didn't include this one in today's exercise because it is my least favorite. It wasn't meant to be filled in with color. It was supposed to be just as ghostly as the others. But because I used watercolor paper, again, it didn't blend as well as expected, and the result didn't really appeal to me. I am still showing it to you anyway, so you can see what kind of result you might get using pastels on a matte surface. It's not horrible, but definitely not my favorite. By the time you're watching this, Tom will be recovering from his surgery, and I'll be taking a short break to look after him. So I know he'll be all right, and I know it's going to be just fine, but I want to be with him as much as I can. So I've finished all my commissions, I've cleared my scheduled and planned ahead so I can take this week a bit of a break just to be with him. And our next exercise, yes, I promise, it will be something different. And here we have the results of what we've done today. I hope you've learned something new today, and I promise you next week we won't be doing more portraits. And as always, keep on practicing, and thank you for joining us.